The cab ride had been longer than Thomas expected, winding through streets that grew narrower, darker, and emptier the closer he got to the coast. The driver barely spoke, answering questions in clipped grunts, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Outside, fog drifted in from the ocean, swallowing the lamplight in heavy folds. The air smelled of salt and decay. When the taxi finally stopped, Thomas peered out and saw the sign flicker to life above the hotel entrance, the Ocean Crest Inn. Half the neon letters were dead, so it glowed instead as OCE, Rest. The irony wasn't lost on him. He stepped out, suitcase in hand, the tires of the cab hissing on wet asphalt as it pulled away without waiting for a tip. The silence that followed was absolute. No other cars, no people. Only the faint crash of waves somewhere beyond the fog. The building loomed over him. 4 stories of faded wood and peeling paint, its windows glowing weakly with the dull yellow of tired bulbs. He felt a chill crawl up his neck, but shook it off. He'd traveled enough to know that old coastal towns often looked half dead at night. Inside, the lobby smelled of sea air and dust. A ceiling fan turned lazily, clicking every time it made a full rotation. The wallpaper had once been floral, but had faded into a murky brown. Behind the counter sat an old man, thin and stooped, with a face like weather-worn driftwood. His eyes lifted as Thomas approached. "Checking in?" The voice rasped like sandpaper. "Yeah," Thomas said, forcing a polite smile. "Reservation for Thomas Reed, booked online." The man stared at him for a moment too long, then slowly nodded. He reached under the counter and produced a key on a brass tag, the number 217 engraved into it. No computer, no ledger, no ID check, just the key. Thomas frowned. "You don't need—" "Room's ready," the man interrupted. "Breakfast's at 7. Checkouts at 11. Thomas hesitated. Something about the phrasing checkouts at 11 felt heavier than it should. He told himself it was just fatigue, the result of too many connecting flights and too much caffeine. He signed a paper receipt that looked decades old and took the key. The hallway beyond the lobby was narrow, lined with sconces that gave off a sickly amber glow. Carpet muffled his footsteps. Every few feet, a door stood slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of dark rooms. Somewhere, a radio played faintly a slow jazz tune crackling through static. He turned the corner toward his room and nearly collided with a maid cart parked in the middle of the hall. The linen stacked on top looked gray instead of white. A housekeeping tag dangled from the handle, yellowed with age. "Hello?" he called softly. No answer. He stepped around it, unlocked room 217, and pushed the door open. The first thing he noticed was the smell, faint but distinct, a mixture of salt water, mildew, and something metallic underneath. The wallpaper here was darker, patterned with faint swirls that seemed to shift if he stared too long. The lamp on the nightstand flickered weakly when he turned it on. He set his suitcase down, loosened his tie, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress creaked, the sound echoing oddly, as though the walls themselves repeated it back to him. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "One night," he murmured. "Just one night." Outside, a foghorn moaned in the distance, deep and mournful. The clock on the nightstand read 11:03 p.m., though it didn't seem to tick. He reached over to set an alarm on his phone, but when he unlocked it, the screen showed no service. He tried the Wi-Fi, next nothing. A faint sound came from the hallway, then a soft shuffle like bare feet dragging across carpet. He froze. It paused, too, just beyond his door. The silence stretched until his heartbeat filled it. Then, slow and deliberate, came 3 knocks. Thomas swallowed. "Yeah?" No reply. Just the hum of the old lamp and the distant sigh of the ocean. He opened the door. The hallway was empty. The maid cart was gone. Only a single wet footprint marked the carpet outside his room, too large to be his, leading away toward the stairwell. Thomas stood in the hallway longer than he meant to, staring at the single wet footprint leading away into the dark. It looked fresh, still glistening under the weak hallway light. His men scrambled for explanations. Maybe another guest had come up from the pool. Maybe it was the maid. Maybe. He rubbed the back of his neck, realizing the air felt colder here, heavier, like the corridor itself held its breath. The faint sound of the ocean filtered through the walls, a hollow roar beneath the building's heartbeat. He closed the door softly and turned the lock, though it didn't make him feel any safer. The old brass key sat in his palm, cool and heavier than it should have been. The engraved number 217 caught the light and seemed to shimmer faintly, almost as if it had been freshly polished. He set it on the nightstand beside his phone and sat back on the bed, trying to shake the feeling that someone was still standing just outside the door. Listening. He told himself it was just fatigue, that eerie tricks of old hotels came with the territory. But even as he said it in his head, he knew it wasn't true. The silence beyond the door wasn't normal silence. It was charged, humming, alive. He stood, deciding to explore a little, maybe stretch his legs, get water from the lobby, or just prove to himself that the place wasn't as empty as it felt. When he stepped into the Halligan, the carpet muffled his footsteps. The lights above buzzed faintly, one flickering overhead like a heartbeat. The footprint was gone. The carpet looked freshly brushed, the pattern smooth, as though someone had passed a hand over it. At the far end of the hallway, something creaked. He froze. It came again, wood shifting, floorboards flexing under weight. He squinted toward the sound, but the hall faded into dimirange haze, ending in a shadowed corner. He could see the faint shape of a door larger than the rest, with an old brass handle. It didn't look like a guest room door. Curiosity tugged at him. He walked slowly toward it, his fingers brushing the wallpaper. The texture surprised him. It felt wet, as though moisture had seeped beneath it, bubbles of damp rising under the faded pattern. The air grew colder as he neared the door. The smell of salt thickened until he could almost taste it. When he reached for the brass handle, he hesitated. It was ice cold to the touch. Had twisted it anyway. Locked. He leaned close, listening. For a moment he thought he heard something faint, rhythmic, not a voice, not a machine. A dripping sound, steady, slow. He pressed his ear against the door, heart hammering, and heard something else beneath it, breathing. He stepped back sharply, every hair on his body standing on end. The door handle rattled once, like something testing it from the other side. Thomas stumbled backward, bumping into the wall. He waited, breath caught in his throat. The rattling stopped. Silence returned. He turned to leave, his chest tight. When a soft chime broke the quiet, the elevator bell. Relief washed through him. Another guest, maybe. Something normal. He hurried toward the lobby, his footsteps echoing faintly. The elevator doors slid open with a groan. Inside stood an old maid cart, the same one from earlier. Linens stacked neatly, bottles of cleaner rattling in their holders. No attendant. He leaned in and called softly, "Hello?" No answer. He looked closer at the folded towels on the top shelf. They weren't gray after all. They were white, but waterlogged, damp to the touch. When he lifted one, it dripped onto the metal floor with a hollow splat. The air inside the elevator was colder. He stepped back slowly, heart pounding, and pressed the call button for the lobby again, though the elevator doors had never closed. After a few seconds, the bell dinged again, and the doors slid shut in front of him on their own. Thomas turned toward the stairwell instead. As he reached for the handle, something caught his eye, a faint light spilling from a room halfway down the corridor. A door hung slightly open. He hesitated, then walked toward it. The brass number plate read 205. Inside, a lamp flickered weakly. The curtains swayed, though the windows were closed. A guest book sat open on the dresser, the pages yellowed and brittle. He shouldn't have looked, but he did. The names filled the pages in looping script, each one crossed out with a single straight line except the last. His hand trembled as he traced it. Thomas Reed. Checked in, 11:03 p.m. Checked out. The dash stretched across the page, unending. His breath came fast, shallow. The clock on the nightstand behind him ticked once, though. It had been silent moments before. Then the pen lying beside the book rolled by itself, stopped, and wrote the next word. Thomas walked back toward the lobby, every step slower than the one before. The hallway stretched farther than he remembered, the walls seeming to bend inward. The buzzing lights hummed louder, their rhythm almost matching the pulse in his ears. When he finally reached the front desk, the old clerk wasn't there. The chair behind the counter sat empty, gently rocking as though someone had just stood up. The bell beside the guest register gleamed faintly. He hesitated, then tapped it. The metallic ding cut through the silence, sharp and hollow. For a moment, nothing. Then a faint rustle came from the far corner of the lobby, where two high-backed chairs faced a cold fireplace. One of them moved. A man sat there, half hidden in shadow. His clothes looked dated brown wool coat, polished shoes gone dull at the edges. His hat rested on his knee, his fingers tapping its brim in slow rhythm. Thomas hadn't seen him when he came in earlier. Excuse me, Thomas said carefully. Do you work here? The man lifted his head. His eyes caught the lamplight gray, distant, the color of old photographs. Work here? He said, voice low and even. No, I'm a guest. Relief flickered in Thomas's chest. Oh, same here. This place. He forced a laugh. It's kind of weird, right? I tried finding Wi-Fi, but nothing works. I think I might be the only one on this floor. The man smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. The signal's always bad near the water, he said. His accent was old-fashioned, clipped, like something out of an old radio broadcast. You'll get used to it. Thomas frowned. Get used to it? The man tilted his head, studying him with an expression that was almost pity. First night's always strange, he murmured. The air feels heavy. The silence. It's the tide. Comes in, goes out. But it always comes back. Thomas shifted uneasily. You've been here long? The man's gaze wandered toward the dark window behind the desk. A night, he said finally. Just one night. Something in the way he said it made Thomas's stomach drop. The words were too careful, too rehearsed. He cleared his throat. Yeah, me too. Room 217. The man's hand froze on the brim of his hat. His eyes flicked to Thomas's, then down to the brass key still clutched in his fist. 217, he repeated softly. That's your room? Thomas nodded slowly. Yeah, why? For a long moment, the man didn't speak. The fireless hearth popped, though there was no wood burning. Then he leaned forward, the lamplight catching the deep lines of his face. I stayed there once, he whispered, before they changed the wallpaper. Thomas blinked. What do you mean, before? But the man was already standing. His chair scraped against the wooden floor, the sound far too loud for the empty room. He picked up his hat, dusted it off with trembling fingers, and turned toward the staircase. You should go back to your room, Mr. Reed, he said. Thomas's mouth went dry. I didn't tell you my name. The man paused halfway up the stairs, his back to Thomas. You did, he said softly. You always do. And then he climbed the rest of the way, vanishing into the shadows above. Thomas stood frozen, his pulse hammering. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. The clock on the wall behind the counter ticked once, then stopped. He stepped forward, looking down at the guest register. The page was still open. His name sat at the bottom, Thomas Reed, checked in 11:03 p.m. But now another line had appeared beneath it in the same looping handwriting as before. Harold Price, checked in April 3, 1954, checked out. The dash ran blank into the margin. Thomas felt the air shift behind him. The faint smell of seawater drifted through the lobby again. He turned slowly toward the glass doors. Beyond them, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, swirling, hungry. Something moved within it, a dark shape, tall and thin, walking past the entrance. The door handles rattled, though there was no wind. Then, from somewhere upstairs, came the distant creak of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth in the hallway above. Thomas backed away until his knees hit the counter. His hand brushed the brass bell again. It rang on its own this time, sharp and sudden. The echo lingered far too long, twisting into something that almost sounded like breathing. He whispered to himself, "You always do." And in the stillness that followed, the hotel seemed to whisper back, its walls sighing with the rhythm of the tide. Thomas climbed the staircase with slow, uneven steps, his hand sliding along the banister coated in a thin layer of dust. The air grew colder the higher he went, carrying a faint smell of damp wood and something metallic beneath it, iron, maybe blood. The carpet muffled his footsteps, yet the boards groaned beneath as though the building were alive, sighing under his weight. At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched in both directions, lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow him wherever he turned. He paused before the first painting, a woman in a high-collared dress, her expression blank, lips pressed into a faint line. Her hands were folded over a hotel ledger. The brass plaque beneath her frame read, Margaret Vale, Proprietor, 1921. The longer Thomas stared, the more the painted eyes glistened, wet with reflected light, as if real tears waited to spill down her cheeks. He looked away quickly, forcing his gaze toward the next portrait, and then next, each one older, more distorted, brush strokes turning frantic near the edges, colors darkening until faces melted into shadow. A draft crawled down the hall, carrying whispers that might have been the wind, but the air was still. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, a faint hum, low and rhythmic, like breathing. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped at a door marked 213. Its handle was rusted, and Thalok hung twisted as though forced open long ago. The wood beneath was stained darker, warped at the edges. He hesitated, then tried the knob. It turned easily. Inside, the room was almost identical to his own. Same furniture, same wallpaper, but older, more decayed. Dust floated thick in the air. The curtains moved as though touched by an invisible breeze. On the nightstand sat an empty glass and a small, silver-framed photograph. He picked it up carefully, brushing away a layer of grime. It was him. Same face, same eyes. The suit was different, older, dated, but there was no mistaking it. His stomach lurched. He flipped the frame over. On the back, a name was scrawled in faded ink. Thomas Reed, guest, room 2117. The date beneath was impossible. March 7th, 1963. He dropped the photo, his pulse roaring in his ears. No, he whispered. That's not no. His voice shook. He turned toward the door, desperate to leave, but something in the mirror beside the dresser caught his eye. His reflection didn't move. He froze. The reflection stood perfectly still, hands at its sides, head tilted slightly to the left. He raised a trembling hand. It didn't. The lamp flickered, and the reflection smiled, just barely. A curl at the corner of the mouth, cruel and knowing. Thomas stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug. The mirror rattled against the wall but didn't break. Behind the reflection, the room looked different, cleaner, brighter, alive. Curtains open, sunlight streaming through, the air shimmering as though from another time. In that reflection's world, he was still checking in. A knock echoed down the hall, low and hollow. He turned toward the open door. The sound came again, 3 slow raps, followed by silence. He stepped into the hallway, heart hammering, but it was empty. Then the portrait of Margaret Vale shifted. He swore he saw her eyes move, her head tilt slightly toward him. The whispering grew louder, curling through the corridor like wind through cracks. Room 217, it breathed. He backed away, shaking his head. I'm done. I'm leaving. He turned toward the staircase, but the hallway had changed. The light flickered, and the path stretched longer, warped like melted glass. The door to his room, the only familiar thing, stood at the far end. But the numbers on the brass plate shimmered, sliding like liquid. Room 213, then 215, then 217, and then blank. The whispers turned into faint laughter, low, mocking. He ran. The floorboards buckled beneath him, each step sounding heavier than the last. The portraits blurred as he passed them, their faces melting into streaks of color. The closer Hay got to the end of the hall, the darker it became, until only a single bulb above his door flickered weakly. He reached for the knob. The brass key in his pocket burned hot against his thigh. The light above him buzzed and died. Darkness swallowed him whole. Somewhere in the black, the reflection's voice whispered, soft, almost kind. "Welcome back, Mr. Reed." Thomas slammed the door of his room behind him, twisting the lock until it jammed. His chest heaved as he pressed his back to the wall, trying to breathe through the panic clawing at his lungs. The silence of the room pressed in, thick and close. For a moment, the only sound was his heart beating fast, uneven, too loud. Then he noticed it. The clock on the nightstand still read 11:03 p.m. He frowned, stepping closer. It hadn't moved since the moment he checked in. He tapped the glass face lightly. The second hand didn't twitch. Dead battery, he thought. But his phone, still lying where he'd left it earlier, showed the same thing. In03, no service, no change. He unlocked it again, refreshing the screen over and over, but nothing moved. The background stayed frozen, the numbers unchanging. He turned on the lamp beside the bed. It flickered twice before steadying, but the air felt wrong, too still, too dense, as if the entire room held its breath along with him. His reflection in the window looked faint, washed out. Behind it, the fog pressed thick against the glass, swirling like smoke. He could hear faint waves crashing somewhere far below, but their rhythm was off. Irregular, like the tide itself had forgotten how to move. He sat on the bed, rubbing his face. "I just need to sleep," he muttered. "Everything'll make sense in the morning." But morning didn't come. He woke, he thought, to the same darkness, the same clock, the same 11:03 staring back at him. The lamp was still on, the suitcase still half open on the bed. His shoes stood neatly by the wall, damp with the same ocean mist that never dried. He stood slowly, realizing the sheets under his hands were cold, as if no one had ever truly slept there. The faint smell of salt hung thicker now, mingling with something sour decay. He walked to the door and pressed his ear against it. Silence. Then, faintly, footsteps, slow, steady, pacing back and forth outside his room. He stepped away, his pulse quickening. The steps stopped when he did. Then, after a beat, 3 soft knocks, just like before. His voice came out hoarse. "Who's there?" No answer, only the whisper of fog against the window. He reached for the doorknob but froze. Beneath the light, he saw something etched faintly into the brass, tiny scratches forming words worn nearly invisible with time. He leaned closer, heart hammering. "Don't open." His stomach dropped. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over his suitcase. The walls groaned softly, wood expanding and settling. But this sound wasn't random, it came in a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, pause, then again. The building was breathing. He turned toward the mirror hanging near the dresser. His reflection looked wrong again, paler, eyes hollow, mouth slightly open as if caught mid-breath. He blinked. The reflection didn't. Its lips moved silently. Then it lifted its hand and pointed toward the clock. Thomas turned. Still 11:03, but now the minute hand quivered. Slowly, painfully it moved, 1 tick forward. 1-4, and the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. He froze, his breath loud in his ears. Then, faintly, something shifted in the corner, a scraping, dragging sound, like fabric sliding across the floor. His hands fumbled for his phone, lighting the screen. The dim glow revealed the corner near the dresser. The suitcase was gone. His heart stuttered. He shone the light toward the bed. The sheets were rumpled, but the suitcase sat open on top again, except now. The clothes inside weren't his. The shirts were faded, the fabric yellowed, the style old. 1950s, maybe earlier. He reached in, fingers trembling, and pulled out a folded piece of paper tucked between them. It was another check-in slip. Name, Harold Price. Room 217. Checked out. The dash trailed endlessly. Just like in the guest book, Thomas dropped the paper. His pulse hammered so loudly he couldn't hear the sea anymore. He turned back to the mirror. His reflection was gone. Only the empty room stared back at him. He whispered, "It's not real. It's not real." The light flickered back on for half a second, and in that half second, the reflection returned. Not his. The man from the lobby, Harold Price, stood where his reflection should have been, smiling faintly, eyes gray and cold. His lips moved with the faintest whisper that seemed to fill the room. "Checkout's at 11. Thomas spun, but the room behind him was empty. Only the clock ticked again. 1:03, back where it began. Thomas didn't remember making the decision to run. One moment he was staring at the clock. The next his hands were on the doorknob, twisting it with all his strength. The door flew open, and he stumbled into the hallway. The corridor was empty, stretching out farther than he remembered, lights flickering in sequence as though guiding him. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of salt and dust. He ran. His footsteps echoed in strange ways. Too many layers, like the sound of someone following close behind. He didn't dare look back. At the end of the hall, he saw the stairs descending into the lobby. The glow of the chandelier faintly visible below. Relief surged through him. "I'm getting out," he muttered, voice shaking. "I'm done with this place." He reached the bottom of the stairs, breath ragged, and pushed through the glass front doors with both hands. The fog outside swallowed him instantly, cold and wet against his skin. The wooden porch creaked beneath his feet. The parking lot was empty. The taxi was gone. Even the road looked unfamiliar. No signs, no lights, just gray mist stretching endlessly in every direction. He started walking. The ground beneath his shoes shifted from pavement to gravel to something softer, sand. He realized he was heading toward the faint sound of waves. The hotel's outline blurred behind him, lights fading like dying embers. His chest loosened slightly. The sea meant civilization, direction, escape. The fog thinned for a moment, revealing the dark shimmer of the ocean ahead. He took another step, and the crunch beneath his shoe changed. He looked down. The sand was covered in footprints, bare human footprints, hundreds of them, all leading in one direction, all leading back toward the hotel. His breath caught. No, he turned around. The fog parted just enough to reveal the building again, closer than before, too close. He'd been walking away, but somehow it had followed him. The neon sign flickered, bright for a split second, and the letters rearranged themselves in the light. Rest. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping. The sound of waves grew louder, but it wasn't waves anymore. It was breathing, slow, deep, the kind that came from something enormous. The ground beneath his feet trembled. He turned and ran, plunging into the fog. He didn't care where he ended up, as long as it wasn't here. But the mist thickened around him, swallowing the world whole. His legs burned, lungs screaming, until suddenly his hand hit something solid. Wood. He blinked, heart pounding. In front of him stood the hotel's front door. The brass handle gleamed faintly, wet with condensation. He stepped back, staring in disbelief. He'd run in a straight line, yet somehow ended up right where he started. He tried again. The back exit, the side door, even the kitchen window behind the dining hall. Every path curved back. Every door led to the lobby. He even tried the elevator next, jamming the button until the doors groaned open. Inside, the walls were mirrored, reflecting his pale, frantic face over and over. The buttons were strange, numbers mixed with faded letters. He pressed L, hoping for lobby, but the elevator jolted violently before descending in silence. The floor indicator above flickered between numbers, B12 blank, then stopped. The doors opened. He was standing in the lobby again. The same chandelier flickered weakly overhead. The same front desk stood empty. The air smelled the same, stale salt and dust. But now something was different. The guest book was open on the counter again. Thomas walked toward it slowly, his heart pounding. His name was still there, scrawled across the page. But this time another line had appeared beneath it in darker ink. Thomas Reed, checked in, 11:03 p.m., checked out, pending, returned 11:04 p.m. His mouth went dry. The pen beside the book moved slightly, scraping faintly against the page like something invisible had nudged it. He whispered, "Who's doing this?" The elevator behind him chimed. Ding. He turned slowly. The doors had opened again, though he hadn't pressed the button. Inside stood a single figure, the old clerk. His back was straight now, his suit perfectly pressed, but his skin was pale, his eyes hollow, glowing faintly yellow. "Mr. Reed," the clerk rasped, voice smoother now, almost calm. "You shouldn't wander. Guests tend to get lost when they leave their rooms." Thomas took a step back, shaking his head. I'm checking out. Right now. The clerk smiled faintly. "Checkouts are at 11. Thomas's voice cracked. "It's been 11 for hours." The clerk's smile widened. Too much. "Exactly." The lights flickered. The elevator doors began to close. Thomas lunged forward, but before he reached them, they snapped shut. The lobby lights went out, plunging everything into darkness. When they came back on a second later, the clerk was gone. The guest book sat open on the desk, and fresh ink gleamed wet on the page. Thomas had stopped trusting the light. Every flicker of it felt like the building's breath, shallow and mocking. After the clerk vanished, silence settled heavy in the lobby again. Sothick it felt physical, pressing against his ears. The air smelled stronger now, salt, mildew, and something faintly sweet like rotting flowers. He stood behind the desk, staring at the guest book, then at the wall behind it. That's when he saw it, an outline. It was faint but unmistakable. A door, its frame hidden beneath the same peeling wallpaper as the rest of the wall. Someone had painted over it to make it vanish. The edges bulged slightly, as if something behind had pushed outward once and then gone still. His hands trembled as he peeled at the wallpaper. The paper came away damp, sticking to his fingers. Beneath it, wood, dark, warped, and old. He found the handle buried under another layer of paint. It took both hands and every ounce of strength to twist it. When it finally gave, the sound it made was like a sigh, the kind you hear from something that's been waiting a long time to exhale. The smell hit him first, old sea air mixed with rot and rust. He gagged, covering his mouth. A narrow staircase descended into blackness. No light, no sound, just the faint drip of water somewhere far below. He hesitated only a moment before stepping down. The floorboards above him creaked faintly as though the hotel was watching. Each step echoed too loudly. His shoes sank slightly into damp wood. He counted 13 steps before his feet hit concrete. The air here was colder, wetter. A single light bulb swung from a frayed cord overhead, flickering weakly with each drip from the ceiling. The basement stretched ahead in two directions, both shrouded in shadow. He took the left corridor first, running his hand along the wall to guide him. It was slick with moisture. He passed old furniture, broken chairs, stacks of linens blackened with mold, a rusted luggage cart that still carried a single suitcase. He stopped beside it. The tag on the handle was half torn, but one word remained. Reed. His chest tightened. He leaned closer. The leather was cracked, but faint initials were burned into the corner. TR. He stepped back, shaking his head. No, I didn't. This isn't mine. But the clothes inside were. His shirt, his tie, even his passport, water damaged but real. His own photo stared back at him. He dropped it, stumbling backward until he hit the wall. Something moved in the shadows, ahead, a faint shuffle, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. He froze. The noise came again, closer now, accompanied by slow, wet breathing. Hello? He whispered. No answer. Only that dragging sound, closer and closer until a faint silhouette appeared just at the edge of the flickering light. It was the maid cart, the same one from the hallway upstairs. It rolled forward on its own, one wheel squeaking faintly. The towels piled on top trembled as though something beneath them shifted. Thomas took a step back. The cart stopped. One towel slid off the top and fell to the floor with a wet slap. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. He crouched, hand shaking, and opened it. Hotel Ledger, Ocean Crest Inn, established 1921. Beneath it were names, dozens of them, each with two dates, check-in and check-out. But the later years stopped at 1963. Every name after that bore the same mark. Pending. The very last entry read, Thomas Reed, pending. He looked up slowly, and his breath froze in his throat. Across the room, the wall had changed. Where brick should have been, there was a row of picture frames, identical and perfectly aligned. He stepped closer, each frame holding an old black and white photograph of a smiling guest in front of the hotel. The first few were faded, their edges curling, but he recognized the pattern. The same suit, the same tired smile, different faces. Then his stomach dropped, because halfway down the line, one photo showed him. Standing on the front steps of the Ocean Crest Inn, suitcase in hand, the same one he carried now. His heart pounded. He touched the glass. The surface was cold. Beneath his fingers, condensation formed, as if someone were breathing from inside the frame. The light flickered again, and in the brief flash of darkness, all the eyes in the photographs turned toward him. He stumbled backward, hitting the cart again. It tipped, bottles clattering to the floor, the sharp scent of ammonia filling the air. He turned and ran down the corridor, desperate to find the stairs, but the way behind him had vanished. The hall stretched longer now, impossibly, so the air thicker, water dripping from the ceiling in a rhythm like a heartbeat. He ran until his lungs burned. Then ahead, he saw another light, a doorway faintly glowing gold. He stumbled toward it, reaching out, hope flickering in his chest. But when he pushed it open, the warm light spilled across his face, and he realized where he was. The lobby, the same desk, the same chandelier, the same open guest book. Only now the old clerk stood behind the counter again, smiling faintly. His voice was smooth, calm, practiced. "Welcome back, Mr. Reed," he said. "Your room is ready." Thomas didn't remember walking through the door. One moment he stood in the lobby, the clerk's words echoing in his ears, and the next he was standing in another hallway, entirely older, darker, forgotten. The wallpaper was stripped away, leaving bare plaster streaked with cracks like veins. The air was colder here, thick with the smell of rust and mildew. A dim light flickered down the corridor, and with each flicker, the shadows shifted like they were alive. He realized he was in what the clerk had once called the old wing, the part of the hotel that guests weren't supposed to see. The ceiling sagged in places, water stains blooming across it like mold. Doors lined both sides of the hall, their numbers faded almost to nothing. Some hung open, showing glimpses of empty rooms. Others were shut tight, their locks rusted shut. A whisper followed him as he walked. It wasn't words at first, just a low hum, like wind trapped inside a bottle. But after a few steps it grew clearer, faint voices overlapping, distant and desperate. He paused, straining to hear. Check-in. Never left. Always 11. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. His hand brushed the wall, cold and damp beneath his fingers. The flickering light at the end of the hall grew brighter, revealing a set of double doors unlike the others. Heavy oak, carved with intricate patterns that looked almost like faces. Above them hung a sign barely legible beneath a layer of dust. East Wing, staff only. He hesitated. Then the faint sound of music reached his ears. A piano, soft and slow, playing through the walls. The melody was off, too slow, a few notes missing. The rhythm broken like someone half remembering a song. He pushed the doors open. Inside was a grand hallway, wider and taller than the rest of the hotel. Chandeliers hung above, their crystals coated in grime. Long mirrors lined both sides of the corridor, their silver backing corroded with age. The floor beneath his shoes was marble, cracked and stained dark in patches. He could see his reflection in the nearest mirror, stretched and warped. He took a step closer. The reflection lagged behind. He froze. Slowly, the reflection lifted its head. Its eyes met his, but the expression was wrong. The mouth curved into a faint, tired smile, the kind he'd seen on the faces in the photographs downstairs. He whispered, "What are you?" The reflection tilted its head, then moved toward him, without him moving. Its hand reached up and touched the glass. Frost spread beneath its fingers. Thomas stumbled back, heartbeat hammering in his chest. Every mirror down the hall flickered to life, each one showing a version of him, standing, sitting, screaming, crying, some older, some younger, all staring directly at him. He turned and ran, the sound of glass cracking behind him. The reflections followed in perfect sync, like a crowd trapped behind a thin veil. Their whispers grew louder, overlapping, until they became a single phrase. "You checked in." He stumbled through another set of doors at the end of the corridor. The piano music stopped instantly. The room beyond was circular, lined with mirrors on every wall, and at its center stood a single chair facing away from him. "Mr. Reed," a voice said softly. Thomas froze. He knew that voice. It was his own. He stepped forward slowly. The figure in the chair turned. It was him. Same face, same clothes, same tired eyes, but older. The skin around the eyes was grayer, the expression emptier. The older Thomas smiled faintly, as though seeing an old friend. "Took you long enough," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Thomas shook his head, backing away. No, this isn't real. It's real enough," the older version said, standing. His movements were stiff, deliberate, as though he'd been sitting there for decades. "The hotel keeps us. We don't leave, we just fade. Until the next one arrives." "The next one?" "You." Thomas felt the air tighten, every breath harder than the last. The mirrors surrounding them began to glow faintly, each one showing a different moment in time. Guests arriving, signing names, smiling, shaking hands with the clerk. Then each image shifted, the same guests screaming, clawing at doors, pounding on glass, until they disappeared. "This place," the older Thomas said, voice low, "feeds on memory. It keeps pieces of us. Every reflection, every photograph, every guest book signature, it's all the same thing. We check in, we forget, we become the story for someone else." Thomas's knees felt weak. "Then how do I leave?" The older version smiled again faintly. "You don't." He raised a hand and pointed toward the mirror behind Thomas. "You replace." Thomas turned slowly. His reflection was gone. The mirror was empty. Then, from deep within the glass, a hand pressed forward, his own, pale and trembling, fingers splayed against the surface. The glass rippled like water. The older Thomas stepped closer. "It's your turn now." Thomas stumbled backward, but the floor beneath his feet gave way. He fell, not into darkness, but into his own reflection. The glass swallowed him whole, cold and weightless. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in front of the chair, alone. The air was still. The older version was gone. Only the mirrors remained, and in each one his reflection smiled. When Thomas opened his eyes again, the first thing he noticed was light. Soft, golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the lobby. For a few seconds, he just stood there, breathing hard, staring around in disbelief. Everything looked different, cleaner, brighter, alive. The chandelier above glowed warmly, its crystals catching the light like morning dew. The clock on the wall finally moved, ticking softly. He exhaled, shaky but relieved. "It's morning," he whispered. "I made it." He laughed once, breathless. The sound echoed strangely, thin and distant, but he didn't care. He was out of the nightmare. Somehow he'd survived the night. Maybe it had been a hallucination, maybe exhaustion, or a dream so vivid it felt real. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake the fog in his head. "I just need to leave," he murmured. "Get some air, find a cab. Forget this place." He turned toward the front doors. They were open, sunlight spilling across the floor. He could see the faint shimmer of the ocean beyond the fog. Relief loosened the tightness and his chest. He reached the doors, then stopped. A reflection caught his eye. The glass of the front door was perfectly polished, clean enough to show his face clearly. Esme lit faintly at his own tired reflection, but then the reflection moved, slower than he did. Its eyes flicked toward the front desk behind him. Thomas frowned, turning to look. The desk wasn't empty anymore. The old clerk stood there, motionless, hands folded neatly on the counter. His eyes glowed faintly under the chandelier's light. The sight froze Thomas in place, but when he blinked, just once, the figure was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than before. He turned back to the door. The reflection was gone too. Only sunlight glared back at him. His hands trembled. He backed away slowly until his hip brushed against the counter. The bell on top jingled softly from the touch. The sound echoed through the lobby, one note that seemed to stretch too long. He stared down. The guest book lay open again, its pages bright and new. No stains, no tornages. The ink on the last line was still wet. Thomas Reed checked in, 11:03 p.m. Checked out, 7:11 a.m. He exhaled shakily. Finally, he whispered, finally. Then faintly the pen beside the book twitched. Its tip dragged one more stroke across the page. Position, staff. Thomas froze. What? He whispered. The air grew colder. The sunlight dimmed, replaced by that same pale amber glow from the night before. He looked down at his hands. The skin looked wrong, grayish, dry. His reflection in the bell's polished surface stared back at him, faint but distorted. His eyes weren't his color anymore. They were dull, faded, like the clerk's. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The ticking clock above the desk slowed, each second stretching longer than the last. The front doors creaked, closing slowly until only a narrow line of light remained. Thomas pressed his palms to his face, whispering, "No, no, no, no. I'm not." A sound stopped him. The soft ring of the bell. He lowered his hands. A man stood at the entrance, suitcase in hand. He looked travel-worn, tired, confused, the way Thomas had looked the night before. Hi, the man said hesitantly. I have a reservation. Thomas Reed. Thomas's breath caught. He looked down at the guest book. The ink shimmered faintly, the letters of his own name blurring into fresh, wet lines. His voice came out calm. Too calm. Not his voice anymore. Checking in? He asked. The man nodded. Yeah, room 217. Thomas smiled faintly. Of course. He reached under the counter, his fingers closing around a brass key. It was warm to the touch. The engraved numbers glinted under the dim light. He placed it gently on the counter. Breakfast at 7, he said. Checkout's at 11. The man smiled gratefully, completely unaware of the faint tremor in Thomas's hand. Thanks, he said, taking the key. As the guest turned to climb the stairs, Thomas looked toward the window. The fog had thickened again, pressing against the glass. In its surface, faint shapes moved, faces, silhouettes, flickers of motion trapped between worlds. He looked back at the guest book. The next blank line waited patiently beneath the last entry. The pen rolled by itself, stopping in front of him. Thomas swallowed hard. His hand moved before he could stop it, dipping the pen in ink. His handwriting was perfect now, elegant, steady. Name, blank, status, pending. The bell rang again. Another shadow crossed the glass doors. Another suitcase, and behind the desk, Thomas smiled. The bell rang softly, cutting through the low hum of the lobby. A new guest stepped inside, dragging his suitcase behind him. His name was Michael Turner, and he had found the Ocean Crest Inn on a travel app offering last-minute coastal stays. The listing had no reviews, no photos, just a simple caption. Quiet, historic ocean view. The fog outside thickened the moment he crossed the threshold. The air inside smelled faintly of salt and polish like an old ship's cabin. The place felt clean but strange, too still, too perfect. He adjusted his backpack strap and glanced around. The lobby was small but beautiful in an old-fashioned way. Dark wood, brass fixtures, the faint tick of a clock somewhere behind the counter, and the man standing there looked perfectly ordinary. Tall, well-dressed, with neatly combed hair and calm eyes. He smiled warmly as Michael approached. Checking in? The clerk asked, voice low and steady. Michael nodded, setting his suitcase beside the counter. Yeah, one night. Turner, Michael Turner. The clerk's smile didn't move his eyes. Of course, he said. Room 217. He reached under the counter and brought out a brass key, its tag gleaming under the amber light. Breakfast is at 7. Checkout's at 11. Michael took the key with a grateful smile. The metal was warm, almost hot. Thanks. Looks like you've got the whole place to yourself tonight. The clerk's expression didn't change. We usually do. Michael laughed softly, awkwardly. Guess business is slow. The clerk's eyes flicked toward the window. The fog outside pressed against the glass. So thick it looked solid. It never leaves, he said quietly. Then, as if realizing what he'd said, he smiled again. Enjoy your stay, Mr. Turner. Michael nodded and headed for the stairs. He could feel the clerk's gaze on his back until he raked the landing. Something about the man's calmness lingered, like a perfume that clings after the person is gone. Upstairs, the hall smelled faintly of damp and salt. Room 217 was easy to find. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The lights flickered once before staying on. The room looked simple. Clean sheets, brass lamp, wooden dresser, a clock on the nightstand. 11:03 p.m. He set his bag down, stretched, and sat on the edge of the bed. His eyes drifted to the window. The fog outside pulsed faintly with the rhythm of waves. He couldn't see the ocean, just a faint glow beyond the mist. Something about the silence felt unnatural. He switched on the television. Static. He changed channels. More static. He turned it off. The hum in the room returned, faint but steady, almost like breathing. He rubbed his temples. You're just tired, he muttered. Long drive, that's all. Then he noticed something on the dresser, a framed photograph. He leaned closer. It was black and white, showing a man standing in front of the hotel's entrance. The man looked familiar. Same height, same suit, same faint, polite smile. Michael frowned, picking up the frame. The inscription beneath read, Thomas Reed, manager, Ocean Crest Inn. He blinked. Wait, he'd just spoken to that man. He set the photo down quickly, his heart thudding in his chest. Maybe it was an ancestor, he told himself. Maybe the place was family-run. That had to be it. He lay back on the bed, telling himself not to be paranoid. But the clock on the nightstand still read 11:03, unmoving, frozen. Downstairs behind the counter, Thomas stood perfectly still. The faintest tremor passed through his hand, just enough to make the pen roll slightly on the guest book's open page. He looked down. The ink shimmered faintly. Michael Turner, checked in, 11:03 p.m. The pen didn't stop there. It dragged one more line beneath, checked out, pending. Thomas stared at the fresh ink until the letters stopped bleeding. Then he looked toward the stairs, his expression unreadable. The chandelier above flickered once. A soft sigh moved through the building, a sound like wind or breath. He turned the guest book around, brushing dust from its edge, and adjusted the brass bell so it sat perfectly centered. The motion was smooth, practiced, automatic. He placed both hands flat on the counter and waited. From somewhere deep within the walls, faint music began to play a warped piano tune, the same one that had haunted him before. Thomas didn't move. His lips parted slightly as he whispered into the empty lobby. Breakfast at 7. The chandelier dimmed again. Checkouts at 11. The clock behind him ticked once and then stopped. Outside, the ocean roared against the rocks, but the fog swallowed the sound until it was nothing but a heartbeat slow, deep, eternal. Inside, the Ocean Crest Inn hummed faintly with life. The walls pulsed. The wood creaked like breath through ribs. The chandelier swayed though no wind moved. Thomas stood behind the counter, still as a statue. The lobby light flickered once, bathing him in golden glow, then returned to its dim amber hue. The guest upstairs, the new one, had stopped moving. The footsteps had gone quiet. It always happened like this. First came silence, then the pulse. He looked down at the guest book. The ink on Michael Turner's name shimmered faintly, wet even though hours had passed. The line below it was already forming. Letters wrote themselves in delicate strokes. Checked out. The dash stretched across the page like a crack through time. Thomas didn't react. He simply turned the page. There were hundreds before it. Thousands, maybe. The same handwriting. The same dashes. No endings. Only beginnings that never stopped looping. From the window, faint shapes moved in the fog. Figures walking toward the hotel, fading as they neared the door, becoming part of the mist itself. Sometimes he thought he heard them knocking. Sometimes when he blinked, he saw faces pressed against the glass, whispering for help, but the fog always took them back. He reached for the key rack behind him. Most of the hooks were empty, but a few keys still hung there, cold brass tags catching faint light. He brushed one with his finger. The number 17 gleamed like an open wound. He whispered to himself, always the same room. From somewhere deep in the walls came the faint sound of a clock chiming once, twice, then stopping mid-tone. Thomas straightened his jacket and waited, because the next guest was already on their way. Upstairs, Michael Turner sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the clock that refused to move. 11:03 p.m. He'd turned off the lamp hours ago, but the light never went fully dark. The faint orange glow from the hallway leaked through the door crack like a watching eye. He told himself he'd leave first thing in the morning, but morning didn't come. He checked his phone. No service, no time update. The battery never drained, never changed. Thessalon's pressed harder until he could hear his own heartbeat echoing inside his skull. He stood, grabbing his suitcase. He needed to get out. The handle was slick with moisture, cold as metal in winter. When he opened the door, the hallway stretched longer than before. The carpet rippled faintly, as though something moved beneath it. The light bulbs above buzzed in a rhythm that wasn't random. It was breathing. He started toward the stairs, each step louder than the last. When he reached the lobby, the clerk, Thomas, was waiting. His smile was soft, kind, almost human. Leaving already? Thomas asked, voice smooth as calm water. Michael nodded quickly. Yeah, sorry, something came up. Thomas tilted his head slightly. Checkout's at 11. Michael forced a nervous laugh. I'll take the penalty fee. Thomas's smile didn't fade. There is no penalty, Mr. Turner. He gestured toward the front doors. The fog pressed against the glass, pale and heavy. But if you step outside before you're ready, you'll lose your way back. Michael hesitated, his grip tightening on the suitcase handle. What does that mean? Thomas didn't answer. The silence stretched, thick as oil. Then he said quietly, the inn keeps what it needs. Michael stepped back. You're insane. Thomas's eyes softened. I was. The guest turned and bolted for the door, shoving it open with both hands. The fog swallowed him instantly. His footsteps faded. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. Thomas waited. The chandelier trembled slightly. From somewhere beyond the door came the faint sound of breathing, then a single knock. Thomas picked up the guest book. The pen moved on its own. Michael Turner checked in. 11:03 p.m. checked out, pending, returned 11:04 p.m. Thomas whispered, welcome home. The basement had grown. Each year or whatever passed for years down here, the walls shifted, stretching deeper into the earth. The old photographs lined both sides of the corridor now, hundreds of faces smiling into eternity, their eyes faintly reflective like wet glass. Thomas walked between them, his footsteps echoing softly. His reflection followed in each frame, older each time he passed. Sometimes he thought he saw the guests move, smiles flickering, fingers twitching, lips parting to whisper names he no longer remembered. At the end of the corridor, the wall pulsed faintly. He pressed his hand against it. The wood was warm. Behind it, faint heartbeats thudded in rhythm. The building breathed through the walls. He whispered, "You're still hungry." The heartbeat quickened. The lights flickered overhead. He turned toward a small wooden door half hidden by shadows. He had never noticed it before, or maybe it hadn't existed until now. When he opened it, a faint glow spilled out. Inside, rows of journals filled narrow shelves. Each journal bore the same embossed title, Ocean Crest Ledger. He pulled one free and opened it. The pages were filled with looping handwriting identical to his own. Every entry detailed a night, a guest, a check-in, and every final line ended the same way, stayed indefinitely. He flipped through the pages faster and faster until the ink blurred, merging into solid black. Behind him, the hotel groaned. The lights dimmed. The air thickened with the scent of salt and rot. He whispered into the shadows, "How long have I been here?" The walls creaked, answering him in their slow, ancient rhythm. "Since 11. The fog never left now. It lived inside the walls, seeping through every crack, curling around every lamp and doorframe. The lobby was quieter than ever, though sometimes faint laughter echoed from nowhere. Thomas stood behind the desk as always, polishing the same brass key that never lost its shine. The fog shifted, and for a moment he saw them dozens of guests wandering through it, some familiar, some new. Some with suitcases, some with nothing but empty hands. Their outlines flickered, translucent. They were all whispering the same word, "Stay." Thomas's chest tightened. He remembered what it felt like to resist, to run, to beg for escape. But those memories came now like dreams, soft, distant, meaningless. The longer he stayed, the more he forgot. He turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, the ocean was gone. Only fog and light remained, rolling endlessly. The hotel floated in it, anchored to nothing, alive and aware. He whispered, "You win." The fog pressed harder against the glass, as though acknowledging him. The chandelier above flickered, one final spark catching its crystals. He turned the vacancy sign on the counter so that it faced the door. The light behind the letters glowed faintly red. Outside, faint footsteps approached through the mist. Another traveler, another night. Dawn never really came to the Ocean Crest Inn. The fog only changed color from gray to gold, from gold to blue. It shimmered faintly now, rolling over the roof and across the shore. From far away, the hotel looked peaceful, almost beautiful, like a memory that refuses to fade. Inside, Thomas stood behind the counter, smiling faintly. His eyes no longer glowed. They were calm, empty, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and forgotten why. He didn't feel hunger or sleep or time anymore. He simply existed. The pen lay in front of him, the guest book open to a fresh page. The last line read, "Thomas Reed, manager." The space below was blank, waiting. The bell rang softly. The door opened. A woman stepped inside, suitcase in hand. She looked around, uneasy. "Hi," she said hesitantly. "Do you have any rooms available?" Thomas smiled. "Of course." He slid the key across the counter. Brass, polished, room 217. "Breakfast at 7, he said. The woman smiled faintly. "And checkout?" Thomas's eyes lifted to meet hers. "Checkout's at 11. She laughed softly, nodding as she turned away. The stairs creaked under her weight. Thomas looked down at the guest book again. The ink shimmered faintly. Name, blank, checked. In, 11:03 p.m. checked out, pending. He closed the book gently, hands steady. Outside, the fog pressed tighter against the glass. The neon sign buzzed weakly, one final flicker of life. OC, pressed. The fog swallowed the letters. The building exhaled, and somewhere deep inside its walls, another clock began to tick.